Welcome into the show. Anyone that has anything to do with Stanford, we haven't been paying a ton of attention because they're many, many miles from here. But we welcome in the voice of the Cardinal. He is Troy Clardy. A welcome, Troy, to the ACC. It's kind of funny here that I haven't quite wrapped my head around it that Stanford and Syracuse are in the same league. I don't know about you.
I whistled for a cab, and when it came near, the license plate said fresh. And I'm sorry. Hey, I was thinking about the bumper music.
We can pot it back up. It's still going here in the background, Troy. We can bring that back for you.
Oh, that's outstanding stuff. No, it's great to be with you guys. Looking forward to a brand new season in a new league, obviously for us here in the West Coast, with Stanford and Cal tethered together and entering into the ACC together, and should be very intriguing. Should be fascinating to watch both of these programs, and especially for the purposes of this conversation, to watch Stanford compete and try to make big strides in year two under Troy Taylor in a brand new league.
Obviously, Pac-12 implodes last year, which I think was sad in many ways for all involved. But was this viewed, joining the ACC as get off the sinking ship and do it in the best possible way? How is this all being viewed out at Stanford right now?
Yeah, at the time that everything was going down, during August of last year, after, everything happened and all the cards fell, and the Pac-12 was going to be no more. It was pretty evident by that point. It made sense for Stanford to come to the ACC, and it still does. Basically, for many different reasons, most notably, Stanford actually cares about women's sports and Olympic sports. The ACC does as well, and outside of the Pac-12, the ACC was the only other Power 5 conference that did more than give just mere lip service to women's sports and Olympic sports. I mean, I don't need to tell you the amazing success that the ACC has had. I mean, it has become the premier women's soccer league in the entire country. Florida State beating Stanford in the College Cup final to help cement that last year. So, a great landing spot for Stanford, and certainly Stanford and Cal were provided with answers that, unfortunately, Oregon State and Washington State did not have at the time. And look, let's face it, Stanford is not limited to just the state of California or even just the Bay Area. It's a school that's national and even international in scope. I mean, they recruit kids regularly from within the ACC footprint. So it's not necessarily like Stanford is a completely foreign brand when it comes to, going back to the East Coast and going back, to North Carolina, South Carolina, other places within the ACC footprint as well. So, as a wise man once said, when the world is running down, you make the best of what's still around. And Stanford, I think, was able to do that when they were to latch on with the ACC September 1st of last year.
And yeah, Troy, you say Olympic sports. Obviously, that's a term that, we all use at all these schools. Maybe some schools. Most schools are lucky to have, we sent this one guy to the Olympics this year. Ain't that neat? Stanford, when they say Olympic sports, Paris 2024 is coming up, they mean it. There's going to be a boat full of Stanford people at the Olympics this year, as there are every year. How much, internally, obviously all these decisions are made based on football and the football money to some extent, but legitimately day to day, how important are all those other sports on campus at Stanford?
Well, certainly it's been a big part of helping the Pac-12 establish itself as the Conference of Champions, as it branded itself. And Stanford did a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to that. Now, unfortunately, didn't necessarily happen, or at least it hasn't happened in football over the last 8 years or so. It wasn't that long ago that Stanford football was a national player on the football scene. They did go to 3 Rose Bowls in the Pac-12 era. Only Oregon was the only other team to go to as many 3 Rose Bowls in that span. USC only went to 1, and look at the trouble they've caused in all this. So, football has, kind of become more of a decision point, with decisions that are being made going forward. But that being said, Stanford still does want to maintain its excellence in the so-called Olympic sports, in women's soccer, in men's soccer. Baseball has been terrific over the past few years. Kind of took a bump on the chin this year as they had a pretty young team. They're looking to get back into it this year. Lacrosse is going to be a big-time a fun thing to watch on the women's side for Stanford this year. So, look, Stanford, brands itself as a school where you can have it all and you can do it all. And, obviously football is going to drive the bus. Obviously both basketball programs are kind of at the fulcrum point as well, with both of those programs turning to new coaches. Kate Pay replacing the great Tara Vanderveer, who retired, and Kyle Smith replacing Jared Hess, and football in year number 2 under Troy Taylor. But they certainly take a lot of pride in what the Olympic sports are able to do and how many Olympic athletes they were able to send. Men's gymnastics team is practically Stanford, for this year. And then they want to make sure that they can try to maintain that as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, they know their way around the pool and the golf course and the tennis courts as well out there.
Yeah.
That's for darn sure. As Troy Clardy, the voice of the Stanford Cardinal, is our guest. And, one of the other big picture things, obviously, that's come out of all these moves all over the place and has been, pretty much ignored throughout it is the travel of these teams and having the miles they'll be racking up. How has Stanford come up with a plan, or is it just kind of what it is right now with, all these East Coast trips they'll be having to make coming up?
Yeah, and look, football, it's a different animal, right? Yeah. You're just going out there just for one game. It's not nearly as arduous as it might be. I'm really intrigued to see how the softball and the baseball schedules come out. The soccer schedules came out a couple weeks ago, and I think they actually came out pretty favorable to Stanford. But from a football standpoint, obviously everyone has all these, worst-case scenarios that pop into their head. Oh, my God, they're going to have to go back to the East Coast 6 weeks in a row and all this other stuff. And yes, Stanford does have a back-to-back. The first half of that just happens to be the game at Syracuse, the ACC opener for the Cardinal on September the 20th. And then they turn around and they head back to Clemson the following week after that. And that's going to be tough, but I think that it helps that game against Syracuse is on a Friday night. So they are able to get back to campus on late Friday night, early Saturday morning, Pacific time. Keep in mind that Stanford runs on the quarter system, so the first day of class probably going to be either that Monday or Tuesday that week following, and they'll probably hop on the plane on Thursday and head out to Clemson to play them on Saturday. But the fact that game is on a Friday at Syracuse, I think kind of helps make the schedule a bit more amenable than it might have been if they'd been back-to-back Saturdays. But outside of that, for football, just hop on the plane, just stay hydrated. Make sure you're good to go, and try to win a football game. I don't think necessarily a whole lot changes from that standpoint from the student athletes as far as they're concerned. Now the equipment guys might have to stay out east between those 2 weeks, but they'll be up for it, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's worse things in life than hopping out of a chartered plane and going somewhere. That is for darn sure. All right,
it's not bad life.
Yes, on the field here, we go back to when Jim Harbaugh got that program turned, everything David Shaw did for his first 7-8 years, and that was 10 wins more often than not there for a decade. What happened there? Because it was rolling under Shaw. I mean, he was getting brought up for NFL jobs, all this stuff. Then it slid. What do you think it was that turned momentum there against the Cardinal about 5-6 years ago?
Confluence of things. Go back to the 2019 season, and there were some decisions that were made on the recruiting side that really affected the offensive line. And unfortunately, Stanford had a bunch of injuries on that offensive line very early in the season. And they were running freshmen out there 4 or 5 at a time at times throughout the remainder of the season. And you go back to the heyday of Harbaugh and Shaw and what Stanford football branded itself as intellectual brutality. Well, what was the linchpin of that? The offensive line. Yeah. The big guys up front who could move a dude from point A to point B against his will and open up big-time holes for Tyler Gaffney and Christian McCaffrey and Bryce Love to run through. And the next thing and Toby Gerhart, and the next thing you knew, 3 of those dudes were coming up short in the Heisman Trophy run, in the Heisman Trophy voting. So, the offensive line, unfortunately, took a real hit in that 2019 season. That kind of forced Stanford to kind of go away from the intellectual brutality scheme of things and go to more of an up-tempo, quarterback-based style of football. Now, it worked in 2019, and it worked in 2020 with KJ Costello and then Davis Mills in 2020. But, of course, what else happened in 2020? The pandemic. And Stanford operating under probably the most stringent and the strictest COVID regulations of any team in the country. No chances at all to meet as a team. Practices severely regulated. And in fact, when Santa Clara County said, hey, you can't play football in this state anymore, in this county anymore, that meant that Stanford had to play 4 games on the road to close out that season. They were able to win all 4 of them, thank goodness, but that took a toll as well, and they really weren't able to recover from that until well into the 2021 season. So a lot of things went against Stanford during that time period. Losing its identity, a lot of fans harp on that, but I think it was kind of moving in that direction anyway. COVID regulations kind of went against them as well. And, it's just not able to necessarily recruit the same kinds of players that they have been able to earlier in the decade. You get that 1-2-3 punch against you, it's going to be tough to win ball games. And now here's Troy Taylor heading into year number 2.
All right, Troy Taylor, tell us about him. Where was he? He was at Sacramento State. If memory serves, I can't say I was watching a lot of Sacramento State, but I feel you see like box scores of like crazy, numbers and stuff coming up at that level of football. What's this guy, and what has he done so far for Stanford?
Yeah, and he's really helped restore the culture. I think culture is so grossly overused in sports these days, but he's really helped restore a lot of things as far as Stanford football is concerned from a culture standpoint. The guy. Yeah, I think, because Stanford had a bit of an injury epidemic as well from 2019 to 2022, the final years of David Shaw's tenure there, I think that kind of caused that coaching staff to kind of go super hands-off in practice. And Taylor comes in and he kind of restores a bit more physicality. I think the players kind of respected that a little bit. Hey, let's go out here and let's work hard here every single practice. And I think they certainly respected that. And look, we knew that year 1 was going to be a rebuild, 3-9. Probably performing up to the expectations that a lot of folks had outside of the program. Now, a couple bounces of the ball here and there. Stanford could probably have finished 6-6 along the way, but we didn't see a whole lot of his offense, the Troy Taylor offense that he ran a lot at Sacramento State, mostly because of the personnel, mostly because the offensive line was just pretty much brand new and entirely young. They've gotten bigger, faster, stronger in that respect since then. Defensively, it was a bit of a struggle, especially in the trenches, but a lot of those guys are back, especially with 2 outstanding cornerbacks in Zeron Manley and Colin Wright, who could help hold things down for Stanford defensively. So I think that Troy Taylor, and Taylor's kind of an unassuming guy. He's not going to necessarily seek out the spotlight. He's not necessarily going to be, like other coaches, maybe around the Rockies anyway, that might be, as Suge Knight would have said, all up in the video, dancing all on the track and all that kind of stuff. He just goes to work. And there's a lot of positivity around the program. There's a lot of positive reinforcement. Now it's based in reality too, right? Mm-hmm. Troy Taylor isn't thrilled that this team went 3-9 last year, and he knows that there's a lot of work and a lot of dominoes that need to fall in the right direction in order for them to improve and become bowl eligible and competitive here in this season. But he's really restored, and I think been a very refreshing addition to Stanford football, and I think that's been borne out in how players feel about the program. And apparently how recruits feel about the program, too, because that's been going pretty well of late, too.
Well, and that in many ways these days is the most important thing going on, to get those guys in the building. One of the guys in the building there, Syracuse fans will know the name, that is Justin Lampson, and one of the it was kind of a 2-quarterback system. He never actually played it down at Syracuse, redshirted, though he did impress in his final spring game, and then hopped in the portal like 2 days later after that a couple of years ago. What kind of role is Lampson looking like he's going to have here this upcoming year?
Yeah, we'll see. Ashton Daniels kind of became the established QB1 as the season went along, but Lampson certainly did see a lot of playing time throughout the entirety of the season. It was weird because we mentioned that Stanford really struggled on the offensive line last year, and that was really borne out in how Stanford was just completely unable to run the ball. last year and completely unable to get a whole lot of protection, or at least get a lot of production, rather, from the running backs. And that also, had a bit of an effect on facets of the passing game as well, as you had to leave in tight ends for pass protection and running backs for pass protection and all those sorts of things. So that kind of affected everything. So as a result of that, the bulk of Stanford's running game became the quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. And Lamson was, kind of proved his worth. Only played like a couple final snaps against Hawaii in the season opener, but really came in as a package guy, and at times, when Daniels got knocked out of a couple of games, proved his worth a little bit as a passer. But mostly on the ground is where he had most of his production. Made some big time runs in a road win at Washington State. Wasn't Picasso a 10-7 win for Stanford that day up in Pullman, but Stanford certainly took it very happily. So yeah, he's proven his worth, and the kids, his teammates realize his toughness and his leadership ability, and it's been kind of neat to see him kind of establish his role on the squad. Now, Ashton Daniels is back. Coaching staff is also high on Miles Jackson. So there's certainly a bit of competition with Troy Taylor. And look, even if someone does establish himself as QB1, as Ashton Daniels, I believe, did as the season went along, they'll always say, well, there's competition at the quarterback spot. And I think that'll still be true heading into this season. But Lamson firmly in the mix, I would imagine, for snaps this upcoming season.
All right, Troy, last thing for you. I'd like to ask this about, especially and now you are an ACC school that'll be playing Syracuse. Brian Brown hired as the new head coach here back end of November into December. Recruiting's gone wild. People are like over the moon of what's going on here. How much has any of that traveled out west? Like, is there any, is any of that reverberated that far, or are we just living in a happy bubble out here about all this stuff?
I don't really think so, because I think it's been the approach really for all the Pac-12 schools that really got affected the most by everything that's been happening this year. It's been more about living in the moment, right, and appreciating what the Pac-12 has been. And we talked about this earlier in the chat, especially Stanford's role in making the Pac-12 and the Pac-10 into what it was. So I really don't think that'll necessarily start coming until we get closer to the season. But I think that this year has been more about appreciating what the Pac-12 was. That crazy conference, Pac-12 after dark, back east. Hey, I lived in the Eastern time zone for 8 years, so that struggle was real. I stayed up many a night, till 1:30, 2 o'clock, watching Stanford football games. So I know that struggle is real, and sometimes going, oh my God, I can't go to sleep after this. This game is just too crazy. And being just the cool conference, right? Other conferences, apparently it matters more. Big Ten, I still think has that 3 yards in the cloud of dust and mentality, and every game is conducted with grave seriousness. But Pac-12 was competitive, but it also was cool. It was also kind of irreverent a little bit. It didn't take itself too seriously. So I think from a Stanford fan's perspective, and I think for most schools, maybe outside of one in Los Angeles, that's a directional school that we won't mention, everyone else, I think, was kind of, just living in the moment and just appreciating this final year of everyone on the West Coast being together. And then, here we are. We're about to scatter off to the 4 wins, Stanford heading off to the ACC. But, yeah, I'm sure as we get closer, ACC football media kickoff is, 6 weeks from now? I got to start looking for flights to Charlotte. I think we'll start getting more into, okay, hey, what's Syracuse doing? I think we'll get more into that mode as we get closer.
All right, Syracuse is at Cal in November, so I think we may learn about the Pac-12 after dark life as well as we get later in the season.
Hey, as long as I find a table at Dinosaur Barbecue the night before our game there on September the 20th, I'm cool. I'm looking forward to being out there again.
All right, Troy. Well, we can make that happen for you. That we can do on a Thursday night. Friday night gets a little trickier. On a Thursday night, we'll get you in. All right, Troy. Great to chat for the first time. Welcome to the league, and I'm sure we'll do this again when we get closer to the game. But thanks a lot, man.
By all means, let's catch up. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and go Stanford.
All of that. Okay, there he is, Troy Clardy, the voice of the Cardinals.